Great. I am so excited to be here and talk about storytelling. And you are in the right place if you are racked with anxiety every time someone asks you what you do. If you break out in a sweat when you have to introduce yourself at a networking event, you're in the right place if you stumble through your stories or beat yourself up for weeks afterwards, if presentations stress you out, and if you'd rather let your boss present your work than do it yourself. First, I'm going to teach you 3 storytelling mistakes that you want to stop making. You're going to understand what happens for your audience and why it undermines your confidence. And then I'm going to share 4 steps to tell compelling stories every time. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Madeline. I'm an introvert. I'm a creative, and I am a beet turned tomato. And before I started my business, I designed and built window displays, retail environments, and experiential marketing events for companies like Nike, Adidas, Armani Exchange, Coach, Luxottica. And what I learned from that experience is how to get a message across in seconds. But I also saw from years of being a designer and then managing creative teams is that the people who are really good at creative problem solving aren't always good at being able to talk about their ideas and sell them to other people. And I used to be one of them. I was always good at connecting with people one-on-one or one-on-2, but anything more than one-on-3, if I had to give a presentation in front of a big crowd, I was terrified. And getting on the other side of that fear was one of the most transformative experiences of my adult life. And that's why I'm so passionate about teaching other people how to speak about their ideas, how to advocate for their work, because communication is the one skill that touches every area of life. And when you get better at telling stories, it makes it easier to influence. It makes it easier to own a room. It makes it easier to capture audience attention. I've worked with people across industries, in tech, in creative fields, in marketing, in law, and I have seen over and over again that just one presentation, one successful presentation can change the trajectory of your entire career. So what I'm going to teach you today is going to save you so much time and frustration because it's going to keep you from rambling and ruminating and beating yourself up after telling stories or presentations that don't go the way you want. So why tell a story? I think of stories like spices. So they add all of the color and flavor and texture to a presentation. And they are also memorable. You are 22 times more likely to remember a story than a fact alone, because the human brain is wired to remember stories. Stories can elicit emotion, they can make your data come alive, but you need to be telling the right story. And there are a few mistakes that tend to trip people up. So let's talk about what those are. If you're telling stories without knowing the ending, it can start to feel really awkward. You can start to panic and get embarrassed. When this happens, you feel uncertain, and so does your audience. And they might start to look a little cringy because they feel so awkward for you. The second mistake that can happen with stories is that you're telling stories that are too long. And what happens here is that you could have a great ending. You could have the most amazing lesson to share in this story, but if you lose your audience as they have to wade through all of these unimportant details before you get to the point, your audience is going to get bored. Their eyes are going to glaze over. And then you're going to get self-conscious, start to get in your head and worry that it's boring. And your audience might take out their phones or type on their laptops and stop paying attention. Mistake number 3 is that you're telling the wrong story at the wrong time. Because stories are this amazing way to connect with your audience. And they can create an experience when you are giving a presentation or when you are meeting with a new client or going on a job interview. But you want to make sure you're telling the right story because, as I mentioned earlier, they elicit emotions, but you want to make sure you're eliciting the emotion that you're aiming for. If you're telling the wrong story at the wrong time, it can bring up a lot of confusion for your audience. You feel awkward, they feel awkward, everyone feels awkward. And I'm guessing that awkward, confused, and uncertain is probably not what you want to create with your stories. The reason that these mistakes keep happening is that you are spending too much time trying to perfect your stories on paper without ever trying them out on other people. I had this one client, we were working on a story that she could use to introduce herself at networking events. And every week we'd meet and we, wordsmith this story, and I challenge her to go out and try it out on a few people. And then we'd come back together and she would still be trying to perfect the order of the words or change exactly how it was written without ever getting any feedback. And when we do that, we are not getting the practice or the information that we need to know if our story is landing. So let's talk about what actually makes a good story. There are 4 steps to tell compelling stories. So I'm going to share all 4 steps, and then I will walk back through each one in a little bit more detail. So step number 1 to tell a compelling story is to decide what you want people to remember. After you've made a decision, step number 2 is to write a story that highlights that thing. Step number 3 is to practice your story out loud. Practicing out loud is different than writing your story on paper and wordsmithing until the cows come home. And step number 4 is to calm your nerves. Let's talk more about step 1, which is the decision. You want to decide what you want your audience to remember and clarify your message. I encourage you to be specific. Because when we're not specific, when our message isn't clear to us, it's also not clear to anybody else. And so I'm going to share the exact template that I use with all of my clients at the beginning of us working on a presentation together. I'll just share a quick example. So I had this one client, he's a post-production supervisor in TV, and he was giving a 3-part panel presentation for this industry series, and it was on budgeting, scheduling, and workflow. And when he came to me, he had 45 slides, 45 for a 15-minute speaking engagement. And it was filled with a lot of boring charts and graphs. And so what we did is we started by defining the objective. And once we had that clarity, we were able to cut down the slides in half, to add in some interesting stories and humor to make these topics come alive, and streamline the entire presentation. And so another place that this can be really relevant, and it comes up a lot for my creative clients, is when they are doing design reviews. And they might be meeting internally with senior leaders, or they might be meeting with clients. And so you can think about how this pertains to you if you're client facing, or if you have a project in your industry where you need to get sign off from your senior leaders. What can happen is that people aren't very specific in setting up the objective for the meeting. And so what you want to do at the beginning is let people know the purpose of the meeting. And so this can sound like, in today's meeting, I am going to present 3 creative directions, and the goal for the end of our time is for you to choose one. And that's really different than what is often happening for my creative clients, where they go into the meeting, they don't define the objective, and they leave with 17 revisions because they never told the client that the purpose of the meeting was for them to make a decision. So that is number 1 of making a decision of what you want your audience to remember. Then, once you have done that, we're going to move on to step number 2, which is to write your story. And the key here, when you think about writing your story, is to make sure that your story is illustrating the thing you decided in step 1. And when I'm working with people, I teach all of my clients a way to tell clear and concise stories in half the time. And I'm going to share with you a storytelling framework that I use that can help you tell these stories in 90 seconds or less and build up a library of stories that you can just pull off the shelf whenever you need them. This is something called the story spine. Improvisers use it on stage to tell stories, and also every movie ever developed by Pixar, they have built the narrative using the story spine. If you have paper, I want you to write a 7-sentence story using each of these prompts. So it's going to start with once upon a time. You're going to write your story as a fairy tale. And it's okay if it's not the finished story. It's okay if it's a little clunky or awkward. This is a creative exercise to get your ideas out of your head. And I'm going to give an example of a professional story. So this is a real story of a client that I worked with. A few years ago, a managing director at a private equity firm reached out to me because she had to speak on a panel in front of 200 clients, and she was terrified of public speaking. Every day, she worked really hard to avoid opportunities that required her to present. And when she was asked to speak in front of 200 clients alongside 4 partners, she was really freaked out. So she reached out to me and said, "Can you help me?" We worked together on all parts of the presentation, refining the content, practicing the delivery, and really helping her calm her nerves and lower her anxiety. And because of that, she got great feedback on that presentation, but she was still really nervous until finally she was picked to lead a new client pitch. And we worked together again on a project pitch that brought in $250 million for her company. Ever since that day, public speaking was no longer a problem, and it transformed all parts of her career. So that's an example of how you can use this tool, the story spine, to create a story that you can tell in a professional setting. So here's one more example. This is a story that Emily wrote at a workshop similar to this. Once upon a time, there was a fashion designer named Emily. Every day, she picked out glitters and sequins to dress up little girls. But one day, she thought about what happened to those shiny pieces of sequin and glitter after the little girls had outgrown their clothes. Because of that, Emily researched what happened to the clothes after they were no longer worn and how much waste it created. Because of that, she decided she no longer wanted to create waste and decided to go back to school to make the fashion industry better. Until finally, she got a master's degree in sustainable fashion. And ever since then, Emily has used her knowledge and skills to make changes. So instead of making more shiny waist in the world for little girls, she makes a brighter future for them to grow in. So this is a way that you can explain a career pivot, for example. So once you have written your story, the next step is to practice your story. Practicing out loud is the #1 thing that's going to improve your stories. When I work with clients, we put together a personalized practice plan so that they know how to spend their time, so that they can make these stories really fluid. They can make sure they are landing and getting their message across in the way they want. And for today, what I want to share with you is 3 quick tips of how you might spend your time. So today, spend 5 minutes after you get off this workshop writing your story. Tomorrow, practice your story out loud. You can just do that at home while you are doing the dishes, or while you are taking the dog for a walk, or commuting to work. And then on Friday, try your story out on another person, because again, that's how you get feedback and see if your story is landing and what you might want to change. After you do that, you want to move on to step 4, which is to calm your nerves. And the reason that this is important is because so often we can have a really well rehearsed, a really well written story, or maybe elevator pitch. But if the soundtrack in our head is blaring, this is boring, this isn't good enough, they're not interested in hearing from me, it's going to undermine your confidence every time. So one of the things that I work a lot on with clients is physical and cognitive techniques to really quiet that mental chatter and the self-sabotaging voice in your head. And the result of this is that you're going to stop rambling through presentations. You're going to stop questioning yourself when you tell stories. And you're going to be able to build consensus around your ideas. So to recap, if you're telling stories that are too long, if you are telling the wrong story at the wrong time, or if you're getting halfway through the story before you start to panic and realize that you wished you were telling a different story, what you want to do is follow these 4 steps. So decide on your message, write a story that illustrates that thing, practice your story, and calm your nerves. I have a special offer for the holidays. I don't normally offer one-on-one sessions except to past clients, but I am making this special offer available, which is a single 90-minute session with me called Polish and Pop. And what we do in this session is that you are going to get a guide, my signature guide on how to create your presentations in 7 easy steps. Then we are going to meet virtually, where we are going to spend time clarifying your message, crafting that story, and putting together your practice plan and your own rituals so that you know how to calm your nerves and you can really make those presentations pop. And the amazing thing about investing in your communication skills is that they pay dividends for the rest of your life. One of my clients came to me because she had just started a new job and she wanted help developing her presentation skills and building her professional presence. When we started, she was working until midnight, putting in so many extra hours, missing dinner with her kids, and feeling really insecure in this new position and in this new environment. She was one of just a few women at this architectural firm. And the things that we worked on were calming her anxiety, building her presentation skills, and managing her time. As a result of the work that we did together, she started leaving work on time. She was able to sleep before presentations instead of laying awake all night. And she created belonging as a woman of color in this male-dominated space. After about a year, she ended up getting laid off from that job, but she felt complete confidence in her skills and in her ability to interview and get a new job. And she actually got 3 job offers in 3 months and was able to choose where she wanted to work. I encourage you to sign up for a session with me because, again, just one presentation can change your entire career. And with that, I would love to take questions from the group.
Madeline, I do have a quick question for you. I've heard in terms of practicing that it's also sometimes good to practice in front of a mirror.
So that's a great idea. And I always suggest people practice away from their computers, away from their notes, because this is how you can get more comfortable with your content so that you can give your presentation or tell your stories in a more fluid, relaxed, and conversational way. So practicing in the mirror is one great way to do it. What I would also suggest is try out your stories or different parts of your presentations while you are doing other things. So for instance, I was just working with a client at a big tech firm. She was preparing for a sales presentation and followed this strategy, which was to work on pieces of her presentation or specific client stories that she wanted to be sure to tell to bring comfort to the client and how they were going to implement this rollout. And so she did it while she was petting her cat. Like, practice for your dog or your cat or your lizard if you don't live with anyone.
I do have a question from Abuba. What do you suggest if you prefer brevity in your story?
Yeah. Time yourself and aim for 60 to 90 seconds. Or even 30 to 90 seconds. And I actually love the story spine for this. I have a lot of clients who are long-winded and struggle with rambling. And the story spine really helps them collect their ideas, think about the story in this step-by-step logical way. And it makes sure that you have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that you get to the end quickly while you still have people's attention.
One other thing I was thinking, Madeline, so some of the women we have on the call I know are in maybe transitional stages where they might be looking for jobs or switching industries. Would you suggest using the story spine as a way to tell their professional story? And also I could see this being like having the session with you would be a wonderful way for them to refine their communication during interviews even. And as they're new on the job or potentially talking to people at a networking event.
Yeah, I do a lot of interview prep with people, both because they want to refine their stories that they can use. They want to shape their overall career narrative, but also because interviewing can be stressful and it can be draining. And so having support to just lower your level of anxiety, be able to reframe what you're doing so that you can keep your emotional state up and that you don't bring one bad interview into the next one. One of the things that I do with clients is help them evaluate their interviews or networking events or presentations. And what that does is it keeps you from ruminating and rehashing and just being really hard on yourself and then going into the next interview feeling defeated before it even starts because you think the same thing is going to happen. So this helps you really wipe off that slate and make sure that each interview is 5% better. And it also really cuts down on the amount of time that you need to prepare for the interviews, because what it does when you evaluate in this very specific format is that you build your roadmap of how to do it each time. And so then when the next interview comes up, you can go back to your roadmap and you know exactly what to focus on.
And I think with for our entrepreneurs who are potentially, pitching investors or possible partners, that could be helpful too. Like that story arc is a great way to tell the story of why you started your company and why you're doing what you're doing.
Yes, absolutely. I worked with a client a few years ago when she had just left her corporate job and she was starting a company. And then I heard from her almost 4 years later. She reached out and said, I started a new company and I could use your help because we're about to start fundraising. So what we were doing is really, building the story of how she could explain this complex tech platform in a way that was accessible to potential investors. And you can also use it in meetings with your existing clients when you are trying to sell them on an idea, for instance, or get them to make a decision, or share an example of, a similar project that you did with another client so they can really feel more confident in your ability to implement.
You can use it everywhere. Okay, we do have one more question from, I think, is it Ray, how you say your name? I see this with other people too, but what would you suggest when your story works and you keep using it repeatedly and you start to get sick of telling your own story?
It's funny that you say that. I just had this come up with a client. We were preparing for a big keynote that she was giving at Creative Mornings. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that organization. So she came, and when we started, and we've worked on some other talks in the past, but she was giving this new talk, and she didn't want to tell the same stories that she had told in the last talk. So she started by telling me about these new stories that she really wanted to tell. The exercise that I took her through was the objective setting. So step one at the beginning, and really making sure that these new stories related to her objective for that talk. Because again, you can have a great story, but it might not be a great story for that particular situation. And so then, in between that session and our next session, she realized, oh, I was really attached to telling this story. And it doesn't fit in my talk. And, she was able to just focus in on the reason to tell a story. Like, what did she want her audience to get out of it? How is it going to be helpful and inspiring to them? And so then we both, reworked some of her tried and true stories that she was already using, but with a slightly different slant to make it extra relevant to this audience, and to sprinkle in some news stories that highlighted like the film that she has coming out next year and just this next phase of her work. What I would say to Ray is that you're the editor of your own story, so you're welcome to change it at any time, but also think about what's going to be most useful to your audience. And that can sometimes help you get past that block of when you feel like you need to recreate the wheel. I'm going to share something on the screen.
Okay.
I would love for you at this moment to take out your phones, scan this QR code, or you can type in the URL here and just share your feedback on this session so that we know what was most relevant and useful for you.
Okay, Sophie had a great last question. They sign up for your 90-minute session. What would be an ideal thing for them to work on you if they don't have a specific presentation?
You know what I can do, Sophie? I'm just going to put my email in the chat. And you're welcome to email me and tell me what it is that you want to work on, and then we can just chat about ideas. And while we're here today to talk about storytelling, some other things that I work on with clients are difficult conversations and conflict resolution. So if you lead a team, for instance, and you need help improving team dynamics, if you are giving performance reviews, for instance, and nervous about giving constructive feedback, like that is another thing that I help clients with. And it's also a place where you can use stories. So I had this one client and we were prepping for his end of the year performance reviews for his team. And he was really nervous about giving some constructive feedback to one in particular and afraid that she was going to be really disappointed. And as we talked through the strategy of how he was going to do that, we went through these steps, like really thinking about, what do you want this person to remember? And the thing that I asked him was, have you ever been in this situation yourself? And he remembered, oh yeah, when I got promoted to the position I'm in now, my boss took me out to lunch. He spent the first 5 minutes congratulating me, and then he spent the next 40 telling me all of the things that I did wrong. And when he thought about that story, suddenly he was able to connect with his employee. He identified with, her humanity, had more empathy for the situation, had this way to remove the hierarchy in this performance review dynamic, and instead really effectively communicate what it was that he wanted this person to know and how it was going to help her rise in her career. So that's another place to tell stories, and performance reviews can be another thing that we could work on in a 90-minute session. So in our last minute, I would love for you to put in the chat one thing that you are taking away from today.
Okay, so daily practice. Decide on the objective for the story that you want to tell.
Yes.
Starting with the end goal. Yep. Absolutely.
I love that, Lisa, you put in starting with the end goal, because that is a great hack for stories, is to decide on the ending and then work backwards.
Once upon a time idea of storytelling.
Yes. Yeah. When you remove the pressure to turn your introduction into the perfect elevator pitch, and instead think of it from this more creative way of, oh, if I were a storybook character, if this were a fairy tale, how would I tell it? It can open up so many more creative ideas to talk about yourself and to talk about your work. And you can also build client stories or project examples and tell it in the same format, just like I did with the managing director.
Yeah. And Laurel says, what you said about not memorizing, practicing while doing something else really resonated for her.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to do the mindset work and to have those cognitive techniques to quiet the mental chatter and get out of your head and get present in your body, because storytelling and public speaking, presenting, whatever you want to call it, these are all things that we often mistake as an activity that we are only doing by pushing words out of our mouths instead of a full body practice.
Well, thank you so much, Madeline. This was awesome. Thank you all for attending.
Also, for anyone who books a single session with me, if you decide you want to work together on a longer term basis, we can just roll that into the cost of a longer term engagement.
Huge round of applause for Madeline. Very excited. I feel like we all walked away with a lot of great takeaways. So thank you again, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.